In this lecture, we're going to learn about aggregate initialization. And this is a unified way to initialize aggregates in C++. As we have seen in the last lecture, an aggregate is some kind of type in C++ that groups some other elements together. And there is a unified way we can use to initialize them. And from the last lecture, we have seen that this kind of initialization is going to call your initializer list constructor for some aggregates, but not all. In this lecture, we're going to make it super clear that we can use this kind of initialization on many aggregates. In the last lecture, we have seen that we can do this on a class or a struct, but we can also do this on an array. You see that we can use this way of initializing things, and it is going to work. I am not actually sure if this calls some kind of initializer list constructor for the array. Because the array is a built-in type in C++, its internal working mechanics are hidden behind the curtains of the compiler, and I have never really taken time to figure this out. But the important thing is that we can use this syntax to initialize arrays, and it is going to work. Another thing I want to be super clear is that the definition of what an aggregate is actually slightly complicated in C++. So please note that I am oversimplifying it here so that we can really work with these things in practice. Two examples of aggregates that we're going to see are struct and array, but note that there is more to this and you can check the documentation if you want to learn more. For now, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this syntax a little more. Okay, here we are in our working folder. The current project is Aggregate Initialization. We're going to grab our template files pretty quick. We're going to put them in place. And we're going to grab this folder and open it in Visual Studio Code. This is going to open the folder. We see the main CPP file here. We can clean it up a little bit, and we're going to set up some struct that we're going to use to play with things. We're not going to set up anything complicated. We're going to set up a point struct. And inside, we're going to have two double member variables, x and y. Let's do that. And we can go in main and set up a point object and use aggregate initialization on it. So let's go down and do that here. We're going to say point p1. And notice that we didn't put any constructor on this guy. It is going to just call the initializer list constructor to set this up. So let's do that. We're going to put this in place and we're going to put in 10 and 20, for example. And you're going to see that this is going to work. It is going to use aggregate initialization because this is a uniform way we have to initialize aggregates in C++. And the C++ compiler is going to put in place the machinery to initialize our aggregates without us having to set that machinery up ourselves, like we set up our initializer list constructor in the last lecture. This is going to work out of the box. So we can build and show that this is actually going to work. Okay, you see the build is good. And if, for example, we have a function to print points, we can go down and do that. We're going to say void print point, and we're going to pass the point by const reference here. And let's say stdc out point and put in our member variables. We're going to have x, I should say coordinates. We're going to say px. And we're going to put a comma, put in y, and say py. And we're going to put in our closing square bracket here. And we're going to put in our new line character. Let's do that. Okay, so we have this. Now we can go down here and call this function on our point object. We're going to say print point. And we're going to say p1 here. We can print it out, and you're going to see that the information we pass here is going to end up in our member variables for this object. Let's build again to take this into account in our executable. The build is finished successfully. We can bring up a terminal to play with us. Let's do that. So let's clear and run rooster. And you're going to see that we have our point here, and this is using aggregate initialization. So this is a really cool way we have to initialize aggregates, and it is going to work out of the box. Another thing I wanted to remind you is that this syntax is also going to work for arrays, because an array is an aggregate in the eyes of a C++ compiler. So we can set up an array down here. We're going to say scores, for example. Let's call it scores. And it's going to be an array. And we're going to initialize it with whatever we want here. Let's say 44, 62, 67, 82. And really put in anything. You can just fill it with junk data. When you are happy, you can put a closing semicolon. And this is going to put together your array. And you see that we are using aggregate initialization on this. This is really all I wanted you to see in this lecture. You probably knew most of this, but I really wanted you to bring to your attention the aggregate initialization terminology to you, because you're going to see that thrown around in many areas in your career as a C++ developer, and I just wanted you to know. If you want, you can print this array by looping, but you already know to do that. I don't want to waste your time showing you that. We are going to stop here in this lecture, and the next one we're going to show you that we can go even further and say which member variable we want to initialize using designated initializers. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.